Now that we've looked at Martin Luther King and the way that he appealed at the same time to several different audiences at once, let's look at the 5 kinds of audiences that your book describes as the kinds of people or organizations you'll be encountering in the business world. Your book identifies 5 kinds of audiences, and this is a pretty good description of the kinds of audiences you'll encounter in a lot of business context. First, you have the initial audience. This is usually the person who asks you to write or create the communication that is going to be shown to other people. Usually in the business world, this will be a direct supervisor. In the academic world, it might be a dean or a department chair, somebody who's going to take what you write and show it to somebody else or route it to other people. So this is the audience that usually commissions the work, or the first person that will see it and who will then send it on, and very often put their own kind of spin on it as they do. Second, the gatekeeper audience. Now, in the business world, the most important kind of gatekeeper audience is the secretary. And only stupid people treat secretaries with contempt, or treat administrative assistants as inferiors or subordinates. The people who do this usually find that their messages don't get through to the bosses. It is extremely important to have a good relationship with secretaries and other kinds of gatekeepers. Other kinds of gatekeepers include editors, or people who work at publishing houses or newspapers if they're going to print what you have to say or what you want to say. But even though these people very often don't make major decisions, if you are not able to get your communication through them, you're not able to get your communication through to your primary audience, the third kind of audience. And the primary audience is the person or the people making the decision that you need them to make. The primary audience is very often the boss, the president of the company, or a major executive in the company. In advertising, it's the buyer. In political advertising, it's the voter. And you notice that before you get to these primary audiences, whether it's an advertiser or a political advertiser or with a corporation, you've got to go through the initial audience, and you've got to go through one or sometimes more gatekeepers. The secondary audience are those people who will give advice to the primary audience, that he'll show it to. Very often, this includes attorneys who will look at what you say and see how it will affect the company or the corporation. Sometimes it affects attorneys 10 years down the road who have subpoenaed, and yes, this has happened to me, have subpoenaed all of your communications for the last 10 years to see what kind of corporation you are. And then you have the watchdog audiences. These are the community interest groups, the People for the American Way, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the Cardinal Newman Society that keeps an eye on Catholic universities to make sure that they are not teaching things that are unorthodox. These are people who don't have power directly, who can't stop something from being implemented. But the watchdog audiences can make your life very uncomfortable if you do not do things in your communications to address their concerns, address their fears, or at least provide whoever is making the communication with an argument to use when the watchdog audience comes forward and says, we don't like this advertising campaign, we think that it's blasphemous, and we want you to get rid of it, or we're going to boycott your product. So those are the 5 basic kinds of audience: the initial audience, the gatekeeper, primary, secondary, and watchdog. And as we're going to see, each of them has to be considered in every kind of communication that you send or write or speak, because one or more of them, and very often all 5 of them, are eventually going to factor into how the communication is received. Let's review our PIBOK method very quickly, very briefly, with these different kinds of audiences in mind. As you write, and as you look at who you're writing to, identify your purpose in writing, realizing that there may be several at once. Who are your audiences? And you very rarely just have one audience in business communication. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you are just talking to your boss, or you're just talking to somebody that you supervise, but even then, there are other audiences that are going to enter in through their conversations, and very often they're not going to report your communications entirely accurately. So you've got to take a lot of care to craft your communications, and if you believe that they're not going to be reported accurately, that's when you do them in writing, and that's what we have emails for. What information does your message include? Again, realizing there will be other audiences down the road. What reasons or reader benefits can you use to support your position? What objections can you expect your readers to have? And how will the context affect the reader's response? The Pi-Bach method. Okay, there are a number of things you have to think of as you decide how you're going to adapt your message to your audience. Sometimes in order to facilitate communication with your audience, sometimes in order to protect yourself. And strategy is very important. Let me tell you a few stories here, a few things that that I've found in my life. When I was first made a department chair, I was very young. I was the youngest member of the department and the only one without tenure. And my predecessor, who I had defeated in an election, was really upset with me. And she did everything she possibly could to undermine my authority as a very young new department chair of an English department. One thing that I learned, she left town every Thursday night and didn't come back until Monday morning. She never took Friday teaching classes. One thing I found, and this was just pure strategy, was that if I sent a message at 5 o'clock on Thursday to the whole department about something very controversial, then on Friday everybody would talk about it except for this particular person. We would arrive to some consensus, and she would come back on Monday with a departmental consensus already made. That's strategy. That's trying to frame the timing of the communication in a way that's going to produce the best possible result. Another strategy that I found a lot, because in the various positions that I've had, I have occasionally been interviewed by reporters, sometimes student newspaper reporters, sometimes reporters from the community, and I found that if I write everything out and include some catchy quotes, that they will take almost everything that I say. But if I just have an interview with them, they will almost always mishear what I say and write something that I didn't say or didn't mean, or write something in a way that makes me look bad. So my strategy when I'm being interviewed by reporters is I always write out an outline of the interview and include a couple of quotes that I want them to use. They always use them. So those are examples of the strategy and the timing of the communication. You also have to decide how you're going to organize the communication. How are you going to present the information? If it's bad news, perhaps you want to say some very positive things first. If it's good news, perhaps you want to say it very quickly. If you're trying to convince somebody of something, you probably want to front load discussing the benefits to them. Say, here are some things that we can do for you, and then ask them the question, or give them the assignment that they're going to have in order to acquire or receive these benefits. But you want to make sure that you tailor the organization of the message. And by that I mean what information comes where within the communication. You tailor it to the specific needs of your audience and of yourself in dealing with this audience. Word choice is very important. People become very upset over context or over connotations of words. If you use the wrong word, if you sound arrogant, if you sound insulting, if you seem to be questioning their integrity, people will become very upset, even if what you're saying doesn't require them to become very upset. So you want to make sure that you choose words that convey the sense of what you want to say, that you generally don't use negative words even when you're conveying negative ideas, that you stay away from loaded terms, that you use words that are clear, that you don't obfuscate, which is a very unclear way to say, don't say unclear things. And then finally, document design and photographs and visuals. And this goes together because very often communications now are more than either a phone call or an email. They're a manual or a brochure or a PowerPoint. And how you design that has a lot to do with how well the communications are going to be received. What you want to do is make sure that you design them so they're very easy to read, or if it's a lot of information, so that they're easy to skim. You do have to decide, and this is one of the most important decisions you make in the modern workforce, whether you're going to pick up the phone and call somebody or walk over to their office or to send them something written, usually an email or sometimes a fax. And there are good reasons to do both, and there are good reasons not to do both. Written messages, emails, or even more elaborate memos or written reports make it easy to present a lot of information quickly, or a lot of information so that you present it exactly how you want it. Especially if it's complicated data, sometimes financial data. It allows you to use tables, to use graphics and kinds of things that help illustrate what you're talking about. And also, written communications are not subject to the same kinds of emotions that oral communications are subject to, especially if you can write them in a very neutral tone without using the kinds of loaded words that we talked about earlier. A written record is a valuable thing in a lot of ways. People cannot say that you said something that you didn't say if you wrote it, because you'll be able to reproduce what you wrote. I have every email I've written since 1995 saved somewhere, just in case somebody, probably a lawyer, comes along and wants to say that I said something that I didn't say. So you have a written message, and that's an advantage, but sometimes it's a disadvantage. And your book doesn't tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this. Sometimes you don't want a written record. Sometimes you want what lawyers call plausible deniability. You don't want it to be too easy for people to reproduce exactly what you said, because you don't want somebody else getting a copy of that. One of the rules that I live by is anything that I put in email or on Facebook or on the web or on Twitter, I just assume is going to be in the New York Times the next day. I assume that anything I write is open to the public, because emails are very easy to forward, memos are very easy to forward. So if you're saying something delicate or something that you don't want to become public information, pick up the phone. Walk over to somebody's office. Don't put in writing something that could come back and hurt you badly. That happens over and over again. There are a lot of other good reasons to speak orally or face-to-face or on the phone when you're trying to persuade somebody of something. It lets you answer people's questions and resolve their conflicts. Gives you, if you're face-to-face, some body language, some contextual clues people can use. You can soften things that you're saying and send other messages through your tone of voice and your hand gestures and your facial gestures to say, it's not that bad, or it's going to be okay. When somebody has a concern, when they're reading something, then you have to wait to address it, and they think about all the arguments that they're going to make against you. But if you're speaking with them and they have a concern, you can usually detect that concern and you can resolve it right there. You can also get things to happen faster. If you call somebody and say, please do this, than if you send an email. People can pretend they didn't read your email. They can even pretend that it got lost. Usually they're lying about this, but they can. But if you talk to somebody and they say, yes sirree, especially if you're the boss, that allows you to move more quickly, and it allows you to hold people accountable faster. Finally, if you're speaking to somebody, you can detect when something's just not going to work, and you can modify it on the spot. If you write it up, then it's written up, and you have to defend what's written up, or you have to at least present that, and other people will read that. But if you're talking to somebody and they say, no, 6% interest just isn't going to work for me, you can say, well, what if we did 5 3/4? And then when you do write it up, you've resolved those kinds of concerns before they ever happen. So to go back to the beginning, realize that you have different kinds of audiences, and that each kind of audience is going to have its own agendas and purposes and ideas and experiences. Realize that the person you think you're addressing your communication to may not be the person who ultimately makes the decision about it, but you've got to manage, especially if it's a written communication, you've got to manage to appeal to several audiences at once, because written communications will be passed around. Oral communications will be reported, and it's to your benefit to make sure that you're very exact and precise in your oral communications to enhance the chance that they'll be reported correctly. But always be thinking not just about your audience, but about your audiences. You'll be glad you did.